Light never stood a chance. By the end of episode 1, the only outcome left for Light was defeat. It is not because he made a mistake or because he wasn't smart enough, it is because of his fundamental personality that he failed. And there's a single line of dialogue that proves this statement to be irrefutable. In episode 1, Light proclaims, "I want the world to know of my existence, that there is someone passing righteous judgment on the wicked. And I will become the god of this new world." There are two important personality traits emphasized in this quote that are incompatible with Light succeeding. The first, most obvious one being Light's absolute belief in his superiority. But this overconfidence in his own abilities and his underestimation of the abilities of everyone else is what allowed him to be snuck up on. In episode 2, L proves that Light isn't as great as he thinks he is, as he uncovers a great amount of information about him, which should have in theory humbled Light, but in execution, it was the exact opposite. Light instead believed L was the only other person that could challenge him, and that if he could kill L, he would win everything. This mindset allowed Light to justify all the risks he took throughout the show. Light would purposely give up information about himself just so that he could hinder the investigation, or so that he could discover information on L. The problem with this is even if Light defeated L, there would always be another person to step up against him, and this new person would have a head start on finding Kira's identity because they could pick up where L left off, even if it is only a limited amount of information. And the creators of Death Note always had this in mind based on the actual events that played out in the story. Think about it, if you had two really amazing characters like Light and L that are the literal backbone of your story, why would you kill one of them 2/3 the way through the series? It just doesn't make sense. Wouldn't the climax have been so much better if L was the one to corner Light instead of Nier? Well, that wasn't the point. The message was that Light could never win this battle because it would never end. That no matter how many genius detectives he defeated, that there would always be another person to challenge him, and his superiority complex allowed him to justify taking the risks that eventually lead him to being caught. But this begs another question. Why did Light even need to challenge L and his contemporaries? If he had simply just continued what he had been doing, in theory he could have won, because it would have been impossible to catch him. And this brings me to the second personality trait that doomed him to fail. It is his pride, echoed in the same quote I mentioned previously, being "I wanted the world to know of my existence." Now, many would argue that Light's most fundamental mistake was not killing every criminal differently, so that no one could prove Kira's existence. But this wasn't a mistake because he needed to let criminals know that he existed, or else they would have no one to fear, and then they would continue doing bad things. And the whole point of Light becoming Kira was to be a deterrent for those that would do evil things. His actual fault is that he cared more about proving that he could become God rather than the result of doing so. So when Lind L. Taylor challenged him on live television, he didn't ignore it, which would have been the best option if he cared about creating this better world, but instead he answered his challenge, which shows he was prioritizing his pride. And after his humiliation by L, he becomes obsessed with prevailing over him, shown in the almost comedic amount of times L mentions winning.
I've won. Well, Nier, looks like I win. What do you think of that, L? This is my perfect victory! That's right! I win!
Which brings me back to the first episode where Ryuka asks Light why he is even doing all of this. Why do you care? And Light responds with, "Because I've been bored too." This whole thing was more or less a game to Light, and that's why he couldn't afford to be bettered by someone else. And that is why he was so easily provoked by L. And yet again, the creators of Death Note had this exactly in mind when creating the story, because they designed L to think in the exact same way as Kira. L cares about proving that he can win against Kira over the fact that Kira needs to be brought to justice. It's this unwavering pride in his own abilities that makes him so similar to Light. If L had never become a detective and found the Death Note first, it isn't unthinkable to believe that he could have rationalized Kira's decisions. In the same way that if Light never found the Death Note, he likely could have become an incredible detective on the side of justice. But this is getting a bit too much into the territory of speculation, so let's just say what we know for certain. We know that because of these two personality traits, being his belief in his superiority and his pridefulness, that Light was doomed to lose this battle from the start. His superiority complex blinded him from below, allowing him to be snuck up on, and his pride forced him to engage in a battle that he could never win. If Light had only cared about the world he attempted to create over his own ego, then he might have actually won. And that's my take on Death Note. Let me know if you agree or disagree down below. Please subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed this type of content and want to see more. But with that, it looks like we are out of film.